What if the future of humanity isn't built around tribes, networks, or endless circles of followers, but around something far rarer, a figure who walks alone, a human who carries a vision no one else can see, and a strength that doesn't come from the crowd but from within? We've been taught for centuries that safety is in numbers, that we survive by sticking with the pack. But what if survival isn't the point anymore? What if the next stage of human evolution isn't about surviving at all, but about transforming? The word lone wolf gets thrown around like an insult. It's used to describe people who don't fit in, who reject the norms, who walk out of line. But here's the truth. Being a lone wolf isn't about arrogance or antisocial tendencies. It isn't about rejecting people just to feel superior. And it's certainly not about being a predator. The lone wolf, empath, the one we're talking about today, is the opposite. They are among the most compassionate, sensitive, and understanding human beings alive. And yet, they choose the solitary path, not because they hate people, but because they can no longer afford to live inside a world built on conformity and noise. Think about it. Every cultural transformation we've ever witnessed, every breakthrough in thought, every rebellion against the old systems, it didn't come from the center of the crowd. It came from someone standing at the edges, carving their own road. It came from the individual who said, "I cannot walk the same way everyone else does. I have to find my own." That is the essence of the lone wolf empath. And here's the shocking truth. In a world that's obsessed with external validation, likes, metrics, and comparison, the lone wolf empath is one of the few left who has the courage to turn inward. Now imagine this. You wake up one morning, and the very traits that society told you made you different, weird, or too sensitive suddenly become the most valuable traits of all. Your ability to sit in silence, to listen deeply, to sense what others miss, to resist following trends, to find joy in solitude. What if those were no longer seen as weaknesses, but as signs of advancement? What if evolution itself rewarded them? That's the future we're stepping into. The lone wolf empath is not running away from society. They're moving ahead of it. They are the ones who take rejection, abandonment, and judgment and turn it into a kind of inner fuel where others break. They bend where others collapse under the pressure of isolation. They discover strength in solitude. The lone wolf empath doesn't reject the pack out of spite. They step away because they know the pack can only teach survival, and survival isn't enough anymore. Survival is the old story, evolution is the new one. But here's where it gets interesting. If you look closely at the way our society is structured right now, everything is designed to keep you dependent on the group. From school to work to social media, you are constantly reminded that your worth depends on how others see you. You are rewarded when you conform. You are punished when you stand apart. Yet, deep down, you know something isn't right. You know that following the crowd hasn't brought you fulfillment. And the very moment you step away, even just a little, you begin to sense the truth. Your real power doesn't come from being accepted. It comes from self-acceptance. That is what makes the lone wolf empath dangerous to the old system. They are cycle breakers. They disrupt generational patterns by refusing to inherit them blindly. They dissolve cultural conditioning by simply saying, "No, this path isn't mine." And in doing so, they become walking proof that another way is possible. The world looks at them with suspicion, sometimes even hostility. But history shows us that the very individuals who were once criticized, mocked, or pushed out are the ones who later redefine the norm. So when we ask what is the future of the lone wolf empath, we're not asking about isolation, we're not asking whether they'll disappear into caves, cutting themselves off from humanity. No, the future of the lone wolf empath is about leadership of a new kind. Not leadership that seeks followers, but leadership that inspires others to lead themselves. It's not about dragging stragglers along. It's about encouraging every individual to carve their own way, just as they did. And here's the twist. Not everyone can survive as a lone wolf. Many will try, and many will return to the comfort of the pack. But for the ones who can endure, who can transform loneliness into mindfulness, rejection into resilience, solitude into evolution, those lone wolves will not just survive, they will shape the blueprint for humanity's next stage. Because when the noise fades, when the distractions collapse, when the old systems crumble under their own weight, it won't be the pack that leads us forward. It will be the ones who had the courage to walk alone. To understand the future of the lone wolf empath, we first need to strip away all the false labels society has plastered onto them. Because if you search lone wolf today, what do you see? Headlines about danger, stories about predators, negative associations with violence or arrogance. It's no wonder people misunderstand the term. But in reality, the lone wolf empath has nothing to do with aggression or superiority. They are not antisocial misfits, and they don't see themselves as above others. They are not running from humanity. They are walking towards something deeper. So what are they really? At their core, lone wolf empaths are individuals who are guided not by external rewards or validation, but by an inner compass. They don't need constant applause to keep moving forward. They don't wait for permission. They don't chase after trends. Instead, they are internally validated, driven by values, instincts, and visions that often run counter to the mainstream. That's why their path is so lonely. The majority can't see what they see, and fewer still can walk where they walk. But here's the irony. Even though they walk alone, they are often the most compassionate, loving, and understanding humans alive. Empathy is not just part of them. It's their foundation. They can see into the struggles of others in ways most people can't. They can sense hidden emotions, feel the weight of unspoken pain, and perceive the silent tension in a room long before anyone says a word. This sensitivity, however, comes at a cost. In a society built on distraction and conformity, sensitivity is treated as weakness. Empathy is labeled too much. Depth is labeled overthinking. And so the lone wolf empath, unable to shut down what they feel, eventually realizes they cannot thrive in the pack structure. But don't mistake this for avoidance. The lone wolf empath isn't hiding because they're fragile. They're stepping back because they're strong enough to reject what doesn't align with their soul. Think of it this way. The pack offers safety, but safety often means stagnation. The empath who dares to step away isn't rejecting people. They're rejecting the limits placed on them. This is where the cycle-breaking nature of the lone wolf comes in. Every generation inherits its scripts. How to live, how to love, how to succeed, how to belong. Most people accept these scripts without question. The lone wolf empath looks at them and says, "This doesn't work for me." And with that choice, they fracture the cycle. Yes, it leaves them exposed to judgment and criticism. Yes, it means facing abandonment and rejection. But it also means they are free. Free to create their own story. Free to redefine what success and belonging look like. Free to carve a path that no one else has walked before. And this carving, it's not glamorous. It's not a highlight reel. It's long nights of doubt. It's days of silence. It's confronting the parts of yourself you'd rather ignore. Yet, that's what makes the lone wolf empath different from those who only dream of change. They don't just fantasize about independence. They live it. They don't just talk about self-acceptance. They embody it. Now, it's important to note something here. Not everyone who spends time alone is a lone wolf empath. And not everyone who resists the crowd is walking the empath's path. Some people isolate out of bitterness. Some withdraw because they feel superior. Some reject others because they fear connection. That is not the lone wolf empath. The true lone wolf empath is not running away. They are moving toward. Their solitude is not fueled by hate, but by love. Love for themselves, for truth, for authenticity, for the vision of a better way of being. The lone wolf empath also knows something crucial. Their path is not meant to be followed. Others may be inspired by them, but they are not looking to gather disciples. They are not recruiting a pack of their own. In fact, if someone tries to follow them, the true lone wolf empath will gently encourage that person to forge their own way. Because the point isn't imitation, it's individuation. Each person must walk their own road in their own timing, with their own lessons. So when we talk about the future of the lone wolf empath, this is the foundation: a human who is deeply connected to others through empathy, yet refuses to sacrifice individuality for acceptance. A human who loves profoundly, yet knows that following the crowd will only dim their light. A human who feels everything, yet uses that sensitivity as a compass instead of a cage. And while it may seem like a lonely existence, the truth is that this exact way of being is what makes the lone wolf empath a prototype of the evolved human. Because if you can face solitude without collapsing, if you can face judgment without losing compassion, if you can walk away from the pack without losing your humanity, you are not just surviving, you are evolving. But that raises the next big question: if the lone wolf empath is carving their own way, what exactly are they leaving behind? What is it about the pack that no longer works? For as long as humanity has existed, the pack has been our default way of surviving. Tribes, villages, families, social circles, all of them built around one central idea: safety in numbers. And for most of history, that made sense. Alone, a person was vulnerable. Together, a group could hunt, build, and defend. But here's the paradox: what kept us alive yesterday is the very thing keeping us stagnant today. The pack is no longer a place of progress. It is a place of preservation. It maintains the old patterns, the old rules, the old fears. And that is precisely why the lone wolf empath must leave it behind. Think about the way the pack operates in modern life. In schools, conformity is rewarded. In workplaces, obedience is prized. On social media, approval is the currency. The pack says, fit in, follow the rules, don't rock the boat, and in return, you get acceptance. You get the illusion of safety. But here's the cost. You trade your individuality for that acceptance. You silence your instincts to avoid rejection. You water down your truth so you won't be labeled as too much. The lone wolf empath knows this trade is far too expensive. They understand that the moment you give up your individuality for acceptance, you've already lost the essence of who you are. The pack teaches you how to survive, but survival is the lowest bar a human can reach. The lone wolf empath isn't interested in survival. They're interested in evolution. They're interested in transformation. And that means leaving the pack, no matter how comfortable it might seem. Of course, not everyone can do this. Many people attempt the path of the lone wolf, but eventually return to the group. They find the solitude too heavy, the silence too loud, the criticism too sharp. They crave the comfort of belonging, even if it means compromising their soul. And so they go back to the pack, where they can blend in again, even if it means staying stuck. That's why true lone wolves are so rare. Once they step away, they do not go back. Not because they couldn't, but because they know going back would destroy everything they've built within themselves. You see, the lone wolf empath has learned to take rejection and turn it into resilience. They've faced abandonment and discovered self-acceptance. They've endured judgment and chosen authenticity anyway. Each wound they've carried has been transformed into a strength. Where the pack's harshness might break others, the lone wolf alchemizes pain into power. They don't walk away because they hate the pack. They walk away because the pack can no longer teach them anything new. This is the difference between the pack and the path. The pack's lessons are about survival. They are about fitting in, about repeating the same strategies that worked for generations. The path of the lone wolf, however, is about expansion. It is about seeing what no one else sees, hearing what no one else hears, and daring to move forward even when no footsteps exist ahead of you. To the pack, this looks reckless. To the lone wolf, it is the only way. And yet, here's where the tension lies. The pack looks at the lone wolf with suspicion. They say, "Why would anyone choose this? Why would anyone leave behind safety, comfort, and belonging?" But the lone wolf empath knows something the pack doesn't. Belonging at the cost of your soul isn't belonging at all. Safety without authenticity is just another cage. And comfort, when it prevents growth, is simply another form of decay. The path of the lone wolf is not easy. It is riddled with solitude, challenges, and constant self-reflection. But it is also where the deepest breakthroughs happen. Without the noise of the pack, the empath begins to hear their own inner voice. Without the distractions of conformity, they begin to sense their true direction. And without the safety net of constant validation, they begin to build an unshakable foundation of self-trust. This is why the lone wolf empath never goes back. No matter how tempting the pack may appear during difficult times, they know the road ahead will test them. They know it will get lonely, but they also know that returning to the pack would not save them. It would suffocate them. Going back would not move them forward. It would drag them backward into cycles they've already broken. So while most people cycle between moments of independence and retreats back into the group, the lone wolf empath continues forward. Regardless of how steep or isolated the road becomes, their compass is internal, their motivation is self-generated, and their validation is their own. They understand that no one else can walk their path for them, and they would never ask anyone to. Because here's the truth. The lone wolf empath doesn't want followers. They don't need a smaller version of the pack trailing behind them. If someone is inspired by their journey, they will encourage that person to step off the trail and create their own. They don't measure their success by how many people follow them. They measure it by how authentically they walk their own path. And so the story of the lone wolf empath is not about isolation for isolation's sake. It's about choosing evolution over survival, authenticity over conformity, individuality over belonging. It is the courage to walk away, not because you hate the group, but because you love yourself enough to keep growing. But this raises a powerful question. What if the entire system, our schools, our workplaces, our very culture, was designed not for conformity, but for individuation? What if the world itself encouraged people to walk their own paths instead of forcing them into the pack? If we want to imagine the future of the lone wolf empath, we have to reimagine the environment where every human being first learns how to be human. School. Because right now, schools are designed for the pack. They reward conformity, punish deviation, and measure worth through comparison. You get a gold star if you sit still, an A if you follow the rubric, praise if you mirror the answers expected of you. But what happens to the student who doesn't fit that mold? What happens to the one who needs silence, who thrives on observation, who learns by listening to their own inner compass rather than external instructions? That student is told they're wrong, that they're behind, that they need to catch up. And in that moment, the lone wolf empath is born, not out of choice, but out of necessity. Now imagine something different. Imagine a classroom where silence isn't punished, but celebrated, where solitude isn't weird, but normal, where the curriculum doesn't revolve around standardized tests and constant external validation, but around developing an inner connection to thought, feeling, and awareness. What if instead of teaching children to perform for others, we taught them to listen deeply to themselves? Picture this. Instead of a getting to know you poster on the first day of class, children are guided to take mindful walks through the forest. They're told not to talk, but to listen to the sounds of the trees, the birds, the crunch of leaves under their shoes. They're instructed to pay attention to their own heartbeat, their own breath, their own sensations. When they return to class, instead of reciting facts about their favorite TV show, they share what they felt. I heard the wind. I noticed my chest tightening. I saw 5 things that made me curious. That's not just self-expression, it's self-awareness. This kind of education would normalize individuation instead of conformity. It would teach interdependence instead of codependence. Instead of teaching children to constantly seek approval from peers and authority figures, it would teach them to respect their individuality, while respecting the individuality of others. Not we are all the same, but we are all different, and that's what makes us whole. Mindfulness, in this vision, isn't just sitting cross-legged with eyes closed. It's the daily practice of tuning into one's own experience without judgment. It's cultivating the ability to discern between external noise and internal truth. Imagine children being taught to notice their emotions rather than suppress them, to describe sensations instead of ignoring them, to understand that their thoughts are not enemies to be silenced, but guides to be understood. In this kind of school, introversion wouldn't be a liability. Sensitivity wouldn't be a burden. Neurodivergence wouldn't be a label to manage. It would be an advantage. Imagine if being quiet was a strength. Imagine if being different was celebrated. Imagine if the student who couldn't sit still in math class wasn't shamed, but redirected to discover math through movement, music, or art. Instead of telling kids, "You must learn like everyone else," we'd be saying, "Find your way of learning, then share it with us." And here's the radical part. What if conformity was the behavior we discouraged? What if it was seen as strange to copy someone else's answers, to wear the same clothes, to parrot the same opinions? What if it was weird to chase status symbols, and normal to create your own? That would flip the entire system upside down. Suddenly, individuality wouldn't just be tolerated, it would be expected. This kind of education wouldn't eliminate subjects like math, science, or history. Those would still exist, but they'd be approached from an entirely different angle. Instead of being taught how to pass a test, students would learn how to integrate knowledge into their own worldview. They wouldn't just memorize equations. They'd ask, how does this connect to me? How do I see this in the world? Learning would no longer be about regurgitating facts for external approval, but about weaving information into the fabric of self-awareness. The effect of this shift would ripple outward. Children raised in this system wouldn't grow up dependent on external validation. They wouldn't collapse when the world failed to approve of them. They wouldn't confuse belonging with conformity. Instead, they'd carry an innate sense of self, strong enough to weather rejection, resilient enough to face solitude, wise enough to discern their own truth amidst the noise. In other words, they'd grow up already walking the path the lone wolf empath discovers later in life. And here's where the transformation becomes undeniable. If education itself encouraged individuation, society wouldn't just change, it would evolve. Because when people grow up being taught to listen inwardly, they stop being easy prey for manipulation. They stop being addicted to validation. They stop following the crowd simply because that's how it's always been done. They become cycle breakers by default. But this vision of education is not here yet. For now, schools still operate as factories for conformity. And so the lone wolf empath emerges out of necessity, carving a path that the system refuses to create. But the question remains, what happens when enough lone wolves begin to carve their own roads? At what point does individual rebellion become collective evolution? Here's a truth most people never stop to consider. Change and evolution are not the same thing. Change is cosmetic. It's surface level, temporary, and reversible. Fashion trends change. Political leaders change. Social movements change laws. But evolution is permanent. It's irreversible. Once a species evolves, it doesn't regress to its old form. Once consciousness transforms, it cannot return to its previous state. And this is where the lone wolf empath becomes not just a product of change, but a catalyst for evolution. Think about how our culture measures progress. We say society has changed because we're more tolerant, more connected, more technologically advanced. But underneath the surface, the same cycles repeat. We still define worth by comparison. We still cling to survival mindsets of fear, scarcity, and competition. We still shape identities around external approval. That's change without evolution. It looks different on the surface, but the foundation hasn't shifted. The lone wolf empath exposes this illusion. They don't just demand new rules, they demand a new state of being. They don't settle for cosmetic adjustments, they insist on transformation. That's why they seem so radical to the pack. Because while most people are satisfied with surface-level reforms, the lone wolf empath is only satisfied when the old paradigm itself dissolves. Consider this: social change might create new opportunities for individuality, but cultural evolution would eliminate the very need for acceptance. In a truly evolved culture, the concept of tolerance wouldn't even exist, because nothing would need to be tolerated. Diversity wouldn't be something people struggle to accept. It would be the natural, unquestioned state of being. The lone wolf empath already lives this way. They don't need others to validate their existence. They don't seek permission to express themselves. Their self-acceptance makes external acceptance irrelevant. That is why the lone wolf empath is so often misunderstood. All of the pack thinks in terms of change. Better laws, more inclusion, more acceptance. But the empath thinks in terms of evolution. Complete transformation of identity, of consciousness, of cultural DNA itself. To the pack, this feels impossible, even threatening. To the lone wolf empath, it feels inevitable. This distinction is critical, because when we confuse change with evolution, we lull ourselves into complacency. We think we're making progress, but we're only rearranging the furniture in the same old house. Evolution requires us to leave the house entirely and build something new from the ground up. And that is precisely what lone wolves do. By refusing to conform, by rejecting survival-based scripts, by choosing self-acceptance over external validation, they embody the next form of being. You can see glimpses of this already in the cultural landscape. More people are questioning the obsession with social media validation. More people are walking away from corporate structures that demand conformity. More people are exploring mindfulness, self-awareness, and neurodivergent perspectives. These are small cracks in the wall of survival culture, and lone wolf empaths are often the ones hammering hardest at those cracks, creating the openings that others eventually walk through. But here's the challenge. Evolution doesn't happen collectively all at once. It starts with individuals, and individuals who evolve ahead of the pack are often met with backlash. They're told they're unrealistic, too idealistic, out of touch. They're criticized for not playing by the rules. History is filled with figures who endured this exact pattern, mocked and rejected at first, celebrated as visionaries later. Lone wolf empaths live this same story in real time. And the paradox is this: cultural evolution requires lone wolves, But lone wolves rarely see the fruits of their labor in their lifetime. Their role is to plant seeds, to walk paths no one else will walk, to hold a vision that seems impossible until, slowly, the culture catches up. It's a lonely job, but it's necessary. Because without them, society would remain trapped in cycles of cosmetic change without ever achieving true transformation. So when we talk about the future of the lone wolf empath, we're really talking about the future of cultural evolution itself, because they are the prototypes of what's next. They are already living in a state of being that the rest of the world hasn't reached yet. They embody self-acceptance without needing social approval. They embody individuation without falling into isolation. They embody empathy without sacrificing boundaries. That is not just change, it's evolution. And here's the crucial point. Evolution doesn't regress. Once enough lone wolves embody this state of being, the cultural paradigm will shift permanently. Just as humanity never returned to pre-language communication, just as we never went back to caves after discovering fire, once consciousness evolves, it cannot be undone. That's the true power of the lone wolf empath. Not just to change society temporarily, but to spark transformations that can never be reversed. But that leaves us with a pressing question. If evolution is rooted in self-acceptance, what does it look like to live fully from that place? And why is self-acceptance the one thing the pack can never truly give you? If there's one truth the lone wolf empath knows better than anyone, it's this: waiting for others to accept you is a losing game. The pack can offer approval one moment and strip it away the next. Society can applaud you today and condemn you tomorrow. Validation is currency that constantly devalues, but self-acceptance, that is permanent wealth. That is the foundation of evolution. Think about how most people are conditioned from birth. Approval becomes the measure of worth. As children, we're praised for being manageable, quiet, or agreeable. We're rewarded when we mirror the expectations of parents, teachers, and peers. Slowly, we learn that love is conditional and belonging is earned. This shapes an identity built on external acceptance, not internal truth. And so, when that acceptance wavers, as it always does, we feel worthless. The lone wolf empath sees through this illusion. They've experienced rejection too many times to keep chasing approval. They've felt the sting of abandonment, the burn of judgment, the silence of being overlooked. At first, those wounds cut deep, but over time, they become something else. Proof that you can survive without acceptance. Evidence that your worth was never dependent on applause. This realization transforms rejection into freedom. Because once you know you can survive being unloved by others, you learn to love yourself without condition. Here's the radical idea. In an evolved society, the word acceptance itself disappears. Why? Because acceptance is only needed in a culture where exclusion exists. It's only necessary in a world where people still believe some identities, choices, or ways of being must be approved. In an evolved paradigm, difference is the norm. Uniqueness is expected. Self-expression is natural. The idea of needing acceptance becomes irrelevant because nothing is excluded to begin with. The lone wolf empath already lives from this place. They don't wait for someone else to greenlight their authenticity. They don't pause for the crowd's permission before speaking truth. They've learned that their path has to be walked with or without applause. And ironically, it's this very refusal to seek acceptance that makes them leaders in evolution. They show others, not by preaching, but by existing, that it's possible to live fully without bending to external validation. But here's why this is so hard for most people. Self-acceptance is terrifying. It means taking full responsibility for your being. It means no longer outsourcing your worth to friends, lovers, employers, or strangers online. It means standing in your truth even when the world disagrees. And that's why so few can sustain the lone wolf path. The pack offers a shortcut. Follow the rules, blend in, receive approval. Self-acceptance demands you create your own rules and validate yourself from within. For the lone wolf empath, this isn't just a personal philosophy, it's survival. They've learned that bending themselves to gain approval only leads to self-betrayal. They've seen how chasing acceptance makes you dependent, fragile, and easily manipulated. By contrast, self-acceptance creates strength that cannot be taken away. When you accept yourself fully, rejection loses its power, judgment loses its sting, abandonment loses its weight. You become unshakable because the one person you needed acceptance from, you already have it. This is why the lone wolf empath thrives in solitude. It's not that they dislike people, it's that they no longer need them to confirm their worth. Their solitude becomes sacred space, a mirror where they see themselves clearly without the distortion of others' opinions. And from that space, they move into the world differently, not desperate for approval, but generous with presence. The pack often misunderstands this. They accuse the lone wolf of arrogance, thinking self-acceptance is the same as superiority. But in truth, it's the opposite. Self-acceptance breeds humility, because when you no longer seek to prove yourself to others, you stop competing, you stop comparing, you stop grasping for recognition. You simply exist in authenticity, and that quiet confidence feels like power to those still stuck in the cycle of seeking. Here's the paradox. When you no longer need acceptance, you often receive it anyway. People are magnetized to those who stand firm in their truth. They're drawn to those who live without apology. But by the time this happens, the lone wolf empath no longer cares. Acceptance has become irrelevant, even invisible. Their worth is no longer up for debate. This is the foundation of evolution, because only a species that transcends the need for external validation can truly transform. As long as we're chained to the opinions of others, we're stuck in survival mode, fearful of rejection, desperate for approval, conforming for safety. The lone wolf empath shows us another way to build an identity on self-acceptance so solid that no amount of disapproval can shake it. That is not just survival, that is transcendence. But this clarity doesn't come without a cost, because the very moment the lone wolf empath stops seeking approval, they often face backlash like never before. Which raises the next question: why does the pack attack what it secretly longs for? Why does the world resist the very transformation it needs? Every lone wolf empath reaches a breaking point. Not the kind where they collapse, but the kind where the pack turns against them with full force. Because here's the truth. The world does not celebrate those who break cycles, it resists them. And the moment you stop playing by the old rules, the moment you stop begging for acceptance, the backlash begins. It can come quietly at first. A cold shoulder, a subtle exclusion, friends who stop calling, family members who whisper that you've changed. But then it grows louder. Criticism, accusations, outright hostility. The pack needs you to feel wrong for stepping away, because your very existence threatens the foundation they stand on. If you can thrive without approval, it exposes the lie that they've been clinging to their entire lives. And nothing terrifies the pack more than realizing their safety net might just be a cage. For the lone wolf empath, this backlash can feel brutal. They've already endured rejection and abandonment in the past, moments that shaped their solitary path. But when the criticism intensifies, it hits at the core of their compassion, because empaths don't want to hurt others. They don't want to be misunderstood. They don't want to be painted as cold or arrogant. Yet the more they walk their own path, the more people project those labels onto them. This is the paradox of empathy. The same sensitivity that makes lone wolves compassionate also makes them vulnerable to criticism. They feel the sting of every word. They absorb the judgment. At times, they even wonder if the pack is right. Maybe I am too different. Maybe I should go back. But deep down, they know returning would suffocate them. The backlash is not proof that they're wrong. It's proof that they're on the edge of transformation. The lone wolf empath also learns something profound through this resistance. Rejection can be confirmation. When the world pushes back hardest, it often means you're touching a nerve. It means you've stepped into territory others aren't ready to face. The backlash becomes a signpost that you're onto something real. Because if you weren't disrupting the old paradigm, no one would bother resisting you at all. And yet, this clarity doesn't make the road any easier. The path of the lone wolf empath is often marked by real-world struggles. Financial instability from rejecting traditional work structures, loneliness from walking away from shallow social circles, limited family ties because of generational misunderstandings. On the surface, this looks like failure, but inside, something else is happening. Resilience is being built. Faith is being forged. Peace is being discovered. Many lone wolves will tell you it's in their most isolated moments that they've felt the most whole. When the noise of the crowd is gone, when the distractions fall away, when they're left with nothing but themselves, that's when the real self emerges. And that self is calm, steady, and unshakable in ways the pack cannot comprehend. This doesn't mean the empath's life becomes free of pain. On the contrary, they often feel pain more deeply than others. But here's the difference. They learn to alchemize pain into wisdom, where others avoid discomfort. The lone wolf leans into it. Where others numb their suffering, the lone wolf extracts lessons from it. The very wounds that the pack fears become the lone wolf's greatest strengths. Of course, not everyone can endure this. Many who attempt the lone wolf path break under the pressure of isolation and return to the pack, and there's no shame in that. The path is not meant for everyone. It requires a unique balance of empathy and resilience, compassion and conviction, solitude and strength. That's why those who can walk it are so rare, and why they stand out so powerfully when they do. The backlash also reveals something else. People project their own fears onto lone wolves. When someone criticizes you for walking alone, what they're really saying is, "I wish I had the courage to do the same." Their judgment is often envy in disguise. They want the freedom you embody, but they're too afraid to pay the price. So they mock what they secretly admire and condemn what they secretly crave. The lone wolf empath, once they understand this, stops taking criticism personally. They see it for what it is, fear speaking in the voice of the pack. And here's the twist. The more backlash they face, the more they realize they're stepping into leadership. Not leadership in the traditional sense. Not titles, not followers, not applause, but leadership as presence. Leadership as proof. By living authentically in the face of resistance, they become an unspoken invitation for others to do the same. They don't have to convince anyone. They don't have to recruit anyone. Their existence alone becomes evidence that another way is possible. Still, this raises a deeper question. Why are some people able to transform backlash into strength while others crumble beneath it? The answer lies in something surprising. Neurodivergence. Because the very wiring of the lone wolf empath's brain, the thing that once made them feel broken, may actually be the very thing that makes them capable of evolving. The word neurodivergent has become more visible in recent years, but for the lone wolf empath, it's more than a label. It's a mirror. Because what most people see as a difference or even a disorder may in fact be the evolutionary divergence that sets the lone wolf apart. It's not brokenness, it's adaptation. It's the brain rewriting its own wiring to survive a world that wasn't built for it. and in the process, discovering a way of being that points to the future. Think about it. The traits we often associate with neurodivergence, heightened sensitivity, deep focus on interests, difficulty tolerating shallow norms, resistance to authority, rejection of empty social rituals, these are the very traits that define the lone wolf empath. They don't conform because conformity feels suffocating. They don't thrive in overstimulating environments because their nervous system is tuned to subtlety. They struggle with shallow conversations because their minds are wired for depth. What looks like a weakness in the pack is actually an advantage on the path. But let's be honest, this divergence rarely feels like a gift at first. Most lone wolves begin in a state of suffering. They feel broken because they can't thrive in the environments everyone else seems to handle. They burn out in schools that demand constant performance. They freeze in workplaces that value efficiency over authenticity. They collapse in social settings where masks are rewarded and depth is punished. The result? Anxiety, depression, burnout, a constant sense of being wrong. This stage is brutal, but it's also essential because the freeze, the burnout, the collapse forces the lone wolf empath to step away. It pushes them to carve a different path. While the pack doubles down on survival strategies, the lone wolf realizes survival alone is not enough. They begin to explore mindfulness, solitude, self-acceptance, not as luxuries, but as necessities. And slowly, the very wiring that once caused so much pain becomes the key to resilience. Neurodivergence, in this way, is not a curse. It's a compass. It diverts the empath away from conformity and toward individuation. It makes them incapable of settling for the survival paradigm. It forces them to demand something more, and in demanding more, they embody evolution. Consider how biological evolution works. A species develops traits that seem maladaptive in one environment but prove essential in another. A beak too long, a wing too short, a lung that processes less oxygen. At first, those differences look like disadvantages, but when the environment shifts, they become the very traits that ensure survival. That is what neurodivergence is for the lone wolf empath. In a world addicted to noise, their sensitivity feels like fragility until silence becomes the rarest resource. In a culture obsessed with external validation, their self-focus looks selfish until external validation collapses under its own emptiness. Then, suddenly, the lone wolf's wiring isn't just different, it's essential. And this isn't just theoretical. You can see it happening right now. As more people burn out from overstimulation, hustle culture, and comparison-driven living, they begin to crave the very things lone wolves have already mastered: solitude, mindfulness, authenticity. Society is starting to catch up to what the neurodivergent empath has been embodying all along. This is why the lone wolf empath's divergence must be reframed. They're not failing to fit in. They're refusing to adapt to a system that doesn't serve human evolution. They are prototypes of what comes next. They're showing us that a new way of living is possible, one where sensitivity is wisdom, where solitude is strength, where divergence is leadership. But here's the hard truth. This path isn't comfortable. Many lone wolves spend years believing they're broken before realizing they're advanced. They absorb the pack's judgment and internalize it as shame. They hide their traits, mask their wiring, and try desperately to blend in. And in doing so, they suffer. Until one day, they break. They collapse into burnout so deep that the old strategies no longer work. And it's in that collapse that the transformation begins. Because once the lone wolf stops trying to be normal, they finally have the freedom to be themselves. Once they stop seeking to fix their divergence, they discover the power in it. And once they embrace their wiring fully, they begin to thrive, not in the pack's environment, but in the new paradigm they're creating. This is why backlash doesn't stop the lone wolf empath. This is why solitude doesn't destroy them. Their brains have already adapted to living outside the norm. They've already survived the freeze, the burnout, the rejection, and in doing so, they've discovered resilience that the pack cannot imagine. So when we talk about the lone wolf empath as the future, we're really talking about neurodivergence as a form of evolutionary divergence. It's the path nature takes when the old environment no longer serves growth. It's the signal that humanity is shifting, and lone wolves are the first wave of that shift, walking proof that evolution doesn't just happen in bodies, it happens in minds. But that raises a powerful question. If the lone wolf empath is already embodying this evolutionary divergence, what happens when they try to reconnect with the pack? What happens when they test their evolved wiring in an environment that still operates on survival? For thousands of years, humanity's story has been written around one word: survival. Survival shaped our instincts, our families, our tribes, our cultures. It dictated how we hunted, how we worked, how we loved. Even today, survival still dominates our lives. It's just disguised in modern clothing. Pay the bills, get the promotion, gain approval, collect followers, stay relevant, survive. But here's the truth the lone wolf empath has uncovered. Survival is the old paradigm. It's not the future, it's the cage we've mistaken for freedom. Look closely, and you'll see survival everywhere. It's in the student who studies not to learn, but to get the grade. It's in the employee who performs not from passion, but from fear of being replaced. It's in the influencer who chases likes not for joy, but for validation. Survival is reactive, competitive, and insecure. It keeps us focused on what might be taken from us instead of what we're capable of creating. And the pack, for all its promises of safety, only reinforces this survival mindset. The group thrives on comparison, on approval, on hierarchy, on fear of being cast out. The lone wolf empath sees through this. They know survival is not enough, because survival never leads to evolution. Evolution requires something deeper, mindfulness. And mindfulness, in its truest sense, is not a trendy meditation app or a fleeting wellness practice. It is the ability to live fully in the present moment, aware of one's thoughts, emotions, and sensations without judgment. It is the shift from fear-driven survival to conscious, intentional being. This is where the lone wolf path becomes revolutionary. In solitude, away from the noise of the pack, the empath begins to cultivate mindfulness naturally. They tune into their inner world, listening to the subtle signals of their body, the quiet voice of intuition, the hidden patterns of thought. Without the constant need to perform or compete, they begin to see themselves clearly, and in seeing themselves, they evolve. Contrast this with the pack. In survival mode, people are constantly pulled into the past or the future. They dwell on regrets or worry about what's coming. They react instead of respond. They chase instead of create. But the mindful lone wolf lives in the now. They respond with clarity. They create from authenticity. They act not from fear, but from presence. That difference is more than psychological. It's evolutionary, because while survival can be unlearned, mindfulness once embodied cannot be lost. Of course, this mindful paradigm is not easy to sustain. It requires constant awareness, constant presence, and it often feels impossible when surrounded by the noise of a survival-driven society. That's why the lone wolf empath finds it so difficult to rejoin the pack. The moment they return, they feel the drag of old patterns, the comparison, the judgment, the fear. Their energy drops, their clarity fades, their biology itself seems to resist going backward. It's not arrogance, it's physics. Evolution does not regress. The pack, in its current form, cannot understand this. To them, the lone wolf's rejection of survival culture looks reckless. Why would you leave security? Why would you risk isolation? But the empath knows safety at the cost of your soul isn't safety. It's a prison. Better to walk alone in freedom than to survive in a cage. This is the great divide. Survival versus mindful evolution. Survival clings. Evolution releases. Survival compares. Evolution accepts. Survival fears. Evolution trusts. Survival asks, "What if I lose?" Evolution asks, "What can I become?" And the lone wolf empath, by embodying mindfulness, shifts humanity from one paradigm to the other. But here's where it gets fascinating. Evolution doesn't require the majority to change first. It begins with a minority, the few who embody the new way of being before anyone else can see it. Lone wolf empaths are those few. They are already living as if survival is obsolete, already walking as if mindfulness is the baseline. And because of this, they carry the blueprint of what humanity can become. Still, the question remains, who will survive this transition? The survival paradigm is familiar, addictive, and deeply ingrained. But the mindful paradigm demands courage, solitude, and trust in the unknown. The pack is comfortable. The path is brutal. Which one wins? The answer is simple. Survival keeps you alive, but mindfulness lets you evolve, and only those who evolve will carry humanity forward. This is the real meaning of survival of the fittest in the new era. It's no longer about strength in numbers or dominance in competition. It's about inner strength. The ability to sustain mindfulness, to maintain presence, to live authentically even in the face of chaos. The lone wolf empath doesn't survive because they're tougher than the pack. They survive because they've already transcended survival itself. But this leaves us with one final question. If the lone wolf empath embodies the future, how do we close the story? How do we understand their role in the grand arc of human evolution? We've walked a long road to get here, from understanding who the lone wolf empath truly is, to examining their divergence from the pack, to reimagining education, culture, and evolution itself. And if one truth has echoed through every step, it's this: the lone wolf empath is not just surviving outside the pack, they are shaping the blueprint for humanity's next stage. Think about everything the pack represents: survival, conformity, validation, comparison. It has kept us alive for centuries, but it has also kept us stuck. Every great transformation in human history has come from individuals who dared to walk away from the group. Not because they hated it, but because they saw beyond it. Fire, language, philosophy, art, technology, none of these breakthroughs came from following the crowd. They came from the lone wolves who carved new paths. Today, the empath who chooses solitude, mindfulness, and authenticity is continuing that legacy. The path of the lone wolf empath isn't glamorous. It doesn't look like success to the pack. On the surface, it can even look like failure. Less money, fewer connections, no applause. But inside, something profound is happening. Resilience is being built. Clarity is being sharpened. Authenticity is being embodied. The lone wolf empath learns that their worth is not dependent on grades, paychecks, followers, or approval. Their worth is self-sustaining, and once that foundation is set, it cannot be shaken. This is why the lone wolf empath represents evolution rather than change, because their transformation isn't temporary. Once you learn to love yourself without external validation, you can't go back to begging for it. Once you experience the peace of mindfulness, you can't fully return to the chaos of survival. Once you embody authenticity, you can't shrink back into masks, evolution, unlike change, doesn't reverse. And lone wolves are living proof of that. Of course, the journey is lonely. It's marked by backlash, misunderstanding, even ridicule. The pack resists what threatens its survival. And the lone wolf empath is the greatest threat of all, not because they seek to destroy the pack, but because they reveal it's no longer necessary. They prove that you can live fully without its approval, and that terrifies those who've built their entire identities on belonging. But here's the paradox. The lone wolf doesn't reject others. They simply refuse to carry them. They don't seek followers. They don't demand disciples. They encourage each person to carve their own path, to discover their own truth, to embrace their own individuation. Leadership for the lone wolf empath isn't about control, it's about embodiment. By existing authentically, they silently invite others to do the same. And slowly, this embodiment spreads. Others begin to question the old ways. They start to feel the suffocation of survival culture. They begin to crave the solitude, authenticity, and mindfulness they see in the lone wolf, and without realizing it, they take their first steps onto the path. This is how evolution begins, not with declarations, but with living examples, not with demands, but with presence. So what is the future of the lone wolf empath? It is not isolation in caves, cut off from humanity. It is not rebellion, for rebellion's sake. The future of the lone wolf empath is leadership of a new kind. A leadership that doesn't gather followers, but creates cycle breakers. A leadership that doesn't cling to survival, but embodies evolution. A leadership that doesn't demand applause, but inspires authenticity. The future belongs to those who can stand alone without collapsing, to those who can accept themselves without needing permission, to those who can face rejection without losing compassion, to those who can walk away from the pack not out of hate, but out of love for themselves, for truth, for a vision greater than survival. And maybe that's the final lesson of the lone wolf empath, that walking alone is not about loneliness. It's about liberation. It's about freeing yourself from the chains of validation, from the scripts of conformity, from the illusions of survival. It's about embodying a new way of being so fully that the old way becomes impossible to return to. The pack will always exist. It will always call you back with promises of safety and belonging. But the lone wolf knows the truth. Safety without authenticity is just another form of captivity. And belonging at the cost of your soul isn't belonging at all. So when the dust of survival settles, when the noise of conformity fades, when the illusions of validation collapse, who will still be standing? It won't be the ones who followed blindly. It won't be the ones who lived only for applause. It will be the lone wolves, the ones who had the courage to walk alone, and in doing so carved the path for everyone else to follow in their own way. Because in the end, the future doesn't belong to the pack. It belongs to the lone wolf empath. And perhaps if you're listening closely, you'll realize it might belong to you too.